You got to explain why you want something done, especially when you establish rules and procedures that imply that what you're asking to do shouldn't be done. But the FBI was just all over the place wrong. And so they had sort of admitted that this was all political. Trump is doing is smoke and mirrors. The bottom line is Trump has washed his hands of this. And the biggest indication of that is when Lavrov met with Marco Rubio in New York this past week. The readout from the Russian Foreign Ministry was the foreign minister met the American Secretary of State. They picked up where they left off in Alaska, and Ukraine was never mentioned. Air defense. In order to say that Ukraine manufactures a Russian drone attack against Poland to get NATO to wake up to the drone threat so that Ukraine can begin training NATO resources on how to engage Russian drones and missiles in hopes that one day that NATO capability will be surged for into Western Ukraine. They could, and they didn't get the Iranians. The Iranians, on the other hand, not only recovered, but began attacking Israel. It was Israel that picked up the phone to call Donald Trump in a panic that said, you have to stop this war. If it continues, we're beat. The Iranians were not stopping their missiles. Their missiles are starting to hit places that hurt. And if they keep coming at us, we could be defeated.
Well, when they came to the door, they made it clear that they were accusing me of violating the Foreign Agent Registration Act, that you believe that I was operating as an agent of the Russian government, an unregistered agent of the Russian government. And I told him, I said, it's curious because as somebody who's familiar with the law, first of all, there is no crime unless I willfully fail to register. And the willfulness can't come until the U.S. government has made a case that I have failed to register, that I should register. And normally that case is made not by 40 FBI agents coming down, kicking down the door, serving a search warrant, but through a letter from the Fire Enforcement Division of the Department of Justice that says, hey, these are some things that you're doing that we're concerned about. We'd like some clarification, etc. So I said, I called BS right off the bat. And I said, you're not here for FAR. You're here to intimidate. You're here. It's bullshit. I said, excuse my language. I said, what's your, they showed me the search word. I said, where's the, the affidavit of probable cause? The one that you showed the judge to say this. It's classified. Oh, really? It's classified. I wonder why that is. What about what you're taking electronics? What about that affidavit that says, these are the things we have to seize, and this is why we believe we have to seize them. This is what we believe we will find when we seize this. Oh, that's classified too. You can't have that. So you're just going to come into my house with 40 freaking agents and tear the whole place apart because what? And then that was the whole thing. And it was just purely intimidation tactic. They seized computers. They went downstairs, the computers I immediately replaced. So I'm like, screw you. You're not shutting me down. I told him that. I said, if you guys don't understand, you picked the wrong Marine. See, I actually believe in the Constitution. I'll defend the Constitution of life. And the First Amendment is an important part of the Constitution, not just freedom of speech. But I'm a journalist, and that means freedom of the press. That means you don't get to come and do what you're doing, and yet you're doing it anyways. But they also went downstairs and started going through documents and such. They ended up seizing my my archive of documents from my time as a weapons inspector in Iraq. The archive that gave me the receipts that allowed me to stand up to the world and say there were no WMD in Iraq. And when they said, how do you know? It's because I did the job for 7.5 years. I was the intelligence officer, and I have the receipts of it. They took that too. So they stole the truth. They came to my house in early August, I guess, late July, early August, with a small box. And they said, here we're starting to return some stuff. I said, well, thank you very much. They also said that, there was an election and that priorities have changed and, and left that hanging. Implying, of course, that it was purely political. And it was, when they were here, I didn't ask for a lawyer. They were like, you want a lawyer? Said, no, don't want a lawyer. I said, am I being accused of a crime? They said, no, we're just executing a search warrant with 40 FBI agents, including a 7-man SWAT team, fully armed, fully armored, FM-16S, the whole thing. Brought in a bomb squad, everything, the treatment. They flew a drone over my house. I feel honored that they spent millions of dollars of American taxpayer money just to try and intimidate a man who can't be intimidated. But it is. They didn't come early in the morning. They didn't use a flashbang. I don't think they were able to convince the judge that I was, a threat of that nature. But they came nonetheless. But I told them when they were here, I said, you can't leave until all your questions are asked. I said, I'm not providing any obstacles. I'm not asking for a lawyer. I'm answering every question openly. But what I won't tolerate is you coming in here, picking up the dust, then leaving, and then walking away with any implication that I somehow didn't fully cooperate or you don't understand what was going on. We couldn't figure it out. Every question must be asked and every question will be answered. And they spent 5.5 hours questioning me. And every once in a while, they paused to the 2 special agents and they'd look at each other. I said, the mere fact that UPC forgot that I used to do this for a living. I helped do the games at one time, not as a federal guy, but, what do you think I did to the Iraqis when I interviewed them, when I interrogated them? I know all the tricks, and I saw them pause and look at each other. And the mere fact that you pause and you look at each other implies that there's a question you have there, but you don't know whether or not you should ask. I'm here to tell you right now because I'm making a statement, a formal statement. I want it to appear in your interview documentation that I'm asking you to ask the question that you want to ask, but you're not asking. And eventually they open up the folder and they showed me emails. You see, they've been monitoring my emails for over 2.5 years. And they've been monitoring my phone calls for over 2. I knew it. Come on, I'm not stupid. I know the game. I know how it works. And so they showed me emails and I said, they said, this is why we're asking. I said, is this the whole email chain that you have? They said, yeah. And I said, well, this is why you guys are so stupid. Because you see, you only took the email chain coming from the Russian embassy because see, I went to visit the ambassador to have an interview with the ambassador to ask questions about Russophobia and the Russian opinion on Russophobia and how Russophobia affects U.S.-Russian relations. These are sort of things that the American people should be aware of. And they were looking at the response of the embassy. And so their implication was, you're taking direction from the embassy. I said, really? There's a whole email you're missing. I'll direct you to it on the computer you just seized. And that's the email where I write the Russian embassy saying, I am a journalist requesting a meeting with the Russian ambassador to talk about Russophobia. You see, nobody directs me. Many people would like to, including my wife, and she often thinks she is in charge, and she is, but I'm hard to direct. And I can guarantee you that no foreign government will ever direct me. And even if, when working for the US government, directing me was tough, because you got to explain why you want something done, especially when you establish rules and procedures that imply that what you're asking to do shouldn't be done. But the FBI was just all over the place wrong. And so they had sort of admitted that this was all political, but then they said that not only have priorities changed, but with priorities comes resources. And they said that they had seized a lot of material. I said, I know that they seized over 1 million pages of documents, over 1 million page, many of them. One of them was a book that I was about to publish. They seized the only electronic manuscript of that. Thank you, FBI. And they seized 2 articles that I was about to publish. Again, the only electronic copies of that. Thank you, FBI. But they also seized, everything I've ever written, including all the memorandums I wrote when I was a weapons inspector. 7.5 years. I'm pumping out multiple memorandums a day. So they have over 1 million pages of things they have to read. Now they only have 2 guys to read them. So this is going to take a long, long time. Well, I will say that the guy who apparently was the lead reader, said, first of all, he said, "You write a lot. I am a writer." But then he said, "It's pretty interesting what you write. It's fascinating, but I have to read it all." I'm like, well, trying to read President Trump's brain is like trying to, decipher truth out of multiple cups of coffee that are turned upside down. And then you look at who knows what's going on there? We know the following. We know that President Trump has acknowledged that the conflict in Ukraine was far more complicated when it comes to conflict resolution than he possibly thought, than he could have possibly have imagined. He has acknowledged it's not as easy as he thought it was. 2, we know that the Trump administration wants to detangle itself from European entanglements, and Ukraine is the biggest, baddest entanglement of them all. And so you have to underscore everything by realizing that Trump doesn't want to get America deeper into this conflagration. He wants to withdraw us. That's his strategic intent. But then we also have to recognize that Donald Trump lives in a universe populated by people, organization, entities that want a bigger war with Ukraine, and are putting a lot of pressure on Donald Trump to stay in, to double down. And so Trump is very good at saying things to appease people that are supposed to be his allies. And so this is what he's done. If you think about it, he had a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky, working on behalf of the British, has concocted this massive con about Ukrainian counteroffensive, and Ukraine is beating the Russians, and if we just get the resources necessary, we can do all this. And Trump sat down and, on the surface, looks like he fell for the con. Because he said, my God, you guys are winning, the Russians are losing, you go forth, take all your territory back. Take all, why stop there? Go on to Moscow. You got it, Vladimir. And Vladimir is like, yeah. And when you listen to Volodymyr tell the story of this, he says that Trump's using terms Ruskies. He's calling them Ruskies. Them Ruskies. I imagine if Trump could possibly have done that, why? Because he's just playing a game with the Zelensky. Because what happened is Trump told Zelensky to go forth and conquer. And then he said, and we'll sell some weapons to NATO if they're willing to pay for them. And NATO can decide what they want to do with those weapons. But there's nothing else coming your way. And Zelensky's like, what? Right. Well, let me answer that last part first. I'm not touching predictive analysis for a 9-foot pole because the Russians have just made a strategic decision that's been sustained throughout, that they don't attach a calendar to outcomes. The British play a very big role in driving the information operations that are attached to Ukrainian military operations, because this is one big con game. It's a massive con. The goal here is to continue to con the West into believing that the Ukrainians can achieve an outcome that weakens Russia. Nobody in the West believes that Zelensky is going to retake the 2,000 or 1,991 borders and all that. But everybody's hopeful that he can exhaust Russia, wear Russia down, get a freeze in the conflict, and get a Korea-type situation where you permanently trap the Russians into this unfinished war that's just going to bankrupt them militarily, fiscally, and politically. That's the hope. So, in order to keep people pouring good money after bad, because the Ukrainians are getting whipped, the Ukrainians have to carry out a con. And they did that in the lead up to the General Assembly, which was their moment of truth, when they were going to meet with the president, because the president wasn't going to meet with them. The only way Zelensky was getting a meeting with this president is when they were both in the same space at the same time, which made the General Assembly the logical time to get it. So they begin an operation in Picross, north of Picross, where the Russians had done an advance, a surge north. And what the Ukrainians did is seek to do a classic counterattack to nip that advance in the butt. They brought in forces trained by the West, equipped by the West, backed up by Western intelligence, and then they did what I guess is equivalent a drone swarm. They basically, massed a horrific, tremendous amount of drones in that area to create a drone wall. And they carried out a counterattack, and it appears to be a successful counterattack. They appear to have recaptured some villages to push the Russians back and to inflict casualties on the Russians. Hey, welcome to War 101. It happens all the time. What I try to tell people is, don't read too much into this, because counterattacks are just a natural part of war. It's like counterpunching in a boxing match. As a Marine, I was trained, if I'm capturing a hill, the moment I take the hill, I have to consolidate my Marines to prepare for the inevitable counterattack, because the weakest point for me after my attack is the fact that I have troops scattered. I don't know who has ammo, who doesn't. I haven't locked everybody in, and the enemy can exploit this uncertainty by counterattack and throwing me back off the hill. And likewise, if I'm defending a position and the enemy's attacking me, I will withdraw from the position, consolidate immediately, counterpunch, and counterattack. It happens. The Battle of Berlin at the end of the war, Soviets were going to win this thing no matter what. Up until the last day, the Germans were launching counterattacks, and many of those counterattacks were locally successful, because a counterattack means that you have assembled forces for a specific point in time. And generally speaking, if you're the one doing the attacking, you can achieve localized superiority. So the Ukrainians have assembled forces, localized place and time, and launched a counterattack designed to create the impression of the inevitability of Ukrainian victory over Russia. And so they've gone in, they've taken photographs, they've done things that can be seen by satellite imagery that can be shown to the president, because the president says, I've seen the evidence of the Ukrainian successes. Of course you have, because Ukraine put everything into this, and you're seeing prisoners of war, dead Russians, destroyed Russian equipment. It happens. But eventually the Ukrainians can't sustain this, because this is a con. Normally, you don't want to carry out a counterattack that uses all of your forces, because then you become depleted. Then the enemy counterattacks and pushes you back, and usually pushes you back further. I have one last question, if we can squeeze it in here. I want to shift gears to another country you know very well, Iran. We saw the 12-day war between Iran and Israel and the United States, and Israel and the U.S. succeeded at taking out some of their military higher-ups. And Iran, I guess, had some successes as well with penetrating inside Israel. But where do things stand now in opinion? Could we see another one of these pop off tomorrow, or have the power dynamics changed? The other thing is political imperatives. What are you willing to risk to gain something? When you're talking about, Bibi Netanyahu, this is about his existential survival, not just political survival, but his survival as a human being. Once he is removed as prime minister, he's going to jail, straight to jail, where he will rot for the rest of his life because he's a criminal. He is one of the more corrupt people that's ever occupied the position of prime minister of Israel. And he knows this. So he has to keep this conflict going. But here's the problem. There's two problems. One, the excuse for the conflict, the concept of Iran being a nuclear nation, seeking nuclear weapons, a nuclear capable nation. There's no more International Atomic Energy Agency inspections, which are mandated by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The safeguards inspections. Why? Because the IAEA, these inspectors, ended up passing intelligence they were gathering about Iran's nuclear facilities and scientists to Israel and the United States so that we could launch attacks to kill these people. So they're just not trusted for good reason. To the 60% enriched uranium, which is permitted under the safeguards regime, not permitted under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the 2015 nuclear deal. But hey, the United States withdrew from that, and Europe never fully complied with it. So why are we talking about those? Oh, because it constrains Iran. You see, we can constrain Iran even if we don't live up to our obligations. But, that deal is dead. The 60% hasn't been accounted for, which means there's a potential that if Iran takes, certain centrifuge cascade configurations, they could create, file material, highly enriched uranium capable of producing 3 to 5 to 10 bombs. So there's that threat there. And even though we destroyed some of their enrichment capacity, the fact is we didn't destroy it all. So there's that same underlying concern about a nuclear-armed Iran is there, which means that Israel and the United States have, on the face of things, a legitimate reason to attack Iran if they wanted to. The problem is, they didn't beat Iran last time. They hit them with their Sunday punch. They killed a bunch of guys, but they were shocked how quickly Iran replaced those people and got back in the saddle and started, playing ball. And Israel hit Iran with everything they had except nuclear weapons. I mean, the MSAD unveiled a decade-so-long covert operation to build drone farms inside Iran. They were used to take out air defense, assassinate people, etc. You only get to use that once, and it didn't work. They also, got Azerbaijan to open up their airspace so that the Israeli Air Force could fly into the Caspian Sea and hit Thrawn from the undefended side of the city. That's not going to ever happen again. So Israel did their best. They did everything they could, and they didn't get the Iranians. The Iranians, on the other hand, not only recovered, but began attacking Israel. It was Israel that picked up the phone to call Donald Trump in a panic that said, you have to stop this war. If it continues, we're beat. The Iranians were not stopping their missiles. Their missiles were starting to hit places that hurt. And if they keep coming at us, we could be defeated. And so that's when Trump, cooked up his little, scheme. Look, the Iranians agreed to ending this war too, because they had been hurt too. It's not like they weren't hurt. I mean, they got hit hard and it was pain. So they were looking for a way to get out of this conflict too. So Trump came in with his, we'll bomb you, you'll missile us, and then we call it a day and we walk away. The problem is Israel hasn't done anything to improve their defenses, meaning they're still as vulnerable today as they were when the war, and the Iranians have improved their missile capability, built new missiles. They have a whole bunch of missiles Israel hasn't seen yet. You and the Iranians, on the other hand, in addition to building up their missiles, they now have fighters from Russia, from China. They have radars. They have missiles. They know what the Israelis did, and the Israelis would never get to come in from the Caspian Sea again. And we're also learning things about, the actual part of the war. The assumption was the Israelis had freedom of the skies. But what we're finding out is that many Israeli attacks, especially near the end of the war, were thwarted by an Iranian air force that was still up and flying. And, in order to launch some of these missiles, the Israelis have to fly, an attack profile within the range of the missiles. And once the Iranians figured out, where the Israelis were operating, they would approach with their air force and start to lock on. So the Israelis would have to break off their attacks because the Iranian Air Force was moving and disrupting. So I don't think Israel's in a hurry to have another go-round with the Iranians. The Iranians are ready. They're prepared. They don't want a war, but they recognize that if there is going to be war, they need to, do everything. But here's the good news, and this comes straight from the Iranian president himself, who I had the honor and privilege of meeting last week. Iran isn't not just trying to build a bomb.